The coffee maker gurgles at 5:47 every morning, and I am always already awake to hear it. Old habits from 40 years of early shifts don't just disappear when you retire. My body still wakes before the alarm, still expects the weight of a tool belt, still listens for the sound of the world before everyone else gets up. The difference now is that nobody thanks me for it, and nobody notices when I'm gone. My name is Walter Grimes. I'm 67 years old and I've lived in this house in Clarksville, Tennessee for 31 years. I built the back porch with my own hands the summer my wife, Roberta, found out she was pregnant with our daughter. I painted every room in this house at least twice. I replaced the roof in 2009 when the storm took half of it off and the insurance company tried to lowball me. I know every creak in every floorboard. I know which window sticks in the summer and which door needs a firm push in January. This house is me, and I am this house. At least, that's what I believed until recently. I pour my coffee and stand at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard. The garden Roberta kept is mostly weeds now. After she passed 3 years ago, I tried for one season to maintain it. Tomatoes, bell peppers, her rose bushes along the fence. By August, I gave up. It was too painful and I was too tired to grieve and garden at the same time. The yard has been slowly going wild ever since, and some mornings I think that's all right. Wild things have a dignity to them. My daughter Diane moved back home 8 months after Roberta died, which at the time felt like a blessing. She was 39, recently separated from her first husband, and I told her she could stay as long as she needed. 6 months turned into a year. Then she brought Craig. Craig Mobley is the kind of man who fills a room with his presence without contributing anything to it. He sells insurance over the phone, or says he does, and works from the spare bedroom with the door closed from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. After that, the door opens and Craig materializes in the living room, feet on my coffee table, television on full volume, a particular expression on his face like the world owes him something and has been slow in delivering. He moved in 14 months ago and has not once, not a single time, offered me a dime toward utilities, groceries, or anything else. When I have raised the subject, Diane gets a tight look around her eyes and tells me Craig is going through a difficult stretch professionally. 14 months is a long stretch. My son Derek is a different problem entirely. Derek is 34 and has been sleeping in the basement since before Craig arrived. He works intermittently at a body shop across town and drinks consistently everywhere else. He's not mean when he drinks. That's what I always told myself. He just gets loud and careless and forgetful, and the next morning he's sheepish and pale, and he calls me Pop and asks if there's any of that good coffee left. I can't stay angry at Derek for long. That's probably my failure as much as his. The three of them together have changed the air in this house. It's not something I can point to directly, not one incident or conversation, just a slow thickening, like humidity before a storm. I feel it most in the evenings, when I come into the living room and the conversation stops, or shifts, or a look passes between Diane and Craig that ends before I can read it. I tell myself I'm imagining things. I tell myself I'm just a lonely old man who misses his wife and has forgotten how to live with other people. I tell myself a lot of things. It was a Tuesday in March when I first knew something was genuinely wrong. I had gone to get the mail, which Diane usually collected before I woke up. She said she liked the walk to the end of the driveway in the mornings. I never questioned it. But that Tuesday I was up earlier than usual and I got there first, and in the stack of envelopes I found something that stopped me at the end of the driveway in the cold morning air. A past due notice from the electric company, 63 days overdue. A disconnect warning. I pay Diane $400 a month specifically for utilities. I hand her $400 in cash on the first of every month, which she accepts with a nod and a small smile and puts in her purse. I have been doing this for over a year. I assumed she was paying the bills. I assumed wrong. I stood at the end of the driveway for a long moment. Then I went back inside, put the mail on the counter, and said nothing. I needed to think before I spoke. Roberta always said that was my best quality and my worst habit in equal measure. You think so long you miss the moment, Walter. But sometimes, thinking saves you from saying something you can't take back. That afternoon, while Diane and Craig were out and Derek was at work, I sat at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and went through 3 months of bank statements that I printed at the library. I had not looked at them carefully in some time. Roberta had always handled the finances, and when she died I fumbled my way through it, and somewhere along the way I handed too much of it to Diane. What I found made the kitchen feel very small. The $400 I had been giving Diane for utilities each month had not been going to utilities. The electric bill was 3 months overdue. The water bill was 2 months overdue. The internet, which Craig apparently required for his professional activities, was 6 weeks behind. The money I gave my daughter every month had been going somewhere, but not where I asked it to go. And there was something else, something worse. On the 5th of each of the last 4 months, there was an ATM withdrawal of $300 from my checking account. I did not make those withdrawals. I am deliberate about my money. I keep records. I know my habits. Those withdrawals were not mine. I took off my reading glasses and sat for a while looking at the table. I thought about the week 2 months ago when my debit card went missing for 3 days and then appeared on the kitchen counter. I had assumed I misplaced it. I am 67, and I live alone, and sometimes I misplace things. I had been willing to believe that. I was no longer willing to believe that. I paid all the overdue bills that afternoon. I drove to the utility offices. I wrote the checks. I made sure the services would stay on. Then I went to my bank and asked for a full transaction history going back 6 months. The manager, a young woman named Priscilla who had helped me before, printed everything out without asking unnecessary questions. The withdrawals were consistent, 5 of them total, always on the 5th of the month, always $300, always from the ATM 3 blocks from our house. I thanked Priscilla and walked to my truck and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Then I drove home and started listening. I don't mean I eavesdropped from the start. I mean I stopped pretending I wasn't seeing what I was seeing. I paid attention. When Diane said she was going to the grocery store and came back with 2 bags and no receipt, I noticed. When Craig took a phone call in the backyard and lowered his voice, I noticed. When Derek avoided my eyes over breakfast on Saturday morning, I noticed. The moment I actually heard something, it wasn't from hiding or sneaking. It was a Thursday evening and I was sitting on the back porch in the dark because I do that sometimes. Just sit in the quiet and watch the yard and think about Roberta. The kitchen window was open. I could hear everything. Diane was talking, her voice low but not low enough. She was saying that the doctor her friend worked with could probably do it, but it would take time to set up. She was saying they needed more documentation. She was saying that once they had the diagnosis, the house could be handled through the courts and it would be clean. Nobody could challenge it. She was saying that Pop was already confused half the time, which is not true, and that anybody who spent an afternoon with him could see he wasn't fit to manage his own affairs, which is also not true, and my blood went so cold sitting on that dark porch that I could not move for a full minute. Craig's voice then, low and practical. What about Derek? Diane. Derek does what I tell him. Craig. He's going to want money. Diane. He'll get his cut when we sell. He knows that. A pause. Then Craig again. How long? Diane. A few months if we push it. We get the evaluation scheduled, get the paperwork moving. The house is worth $380, maybe $400 now with the market. Split 3 ways after legal fees. That's still good money. I sat on that porch for a long time after the kitchen light went off. My own daughter. My daughter who I had held in my arms in the hospital when she was 7 hours old. My daughter who cried so hard at Roberta's funeral that I held her up because her legs wouldn't hold her. My daughter who had moved back in and I had been so grateful because the house was so quiet after Roberta and having Diane back felt like something was returning, something warm. I had told myself the tension with Craig was just adjustment. I had told myself the money confusion was disorganization, not malice. I had believed what I wanted to believe because the alternative was too terrible. It was not too terrible. It was just true. I went inside and locked my bedroom door and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. I didn't sleep much that night. By 4 in the morning, I had made my decisions. I left the house at 7, before anyone was awake. I drove to a diner on the edge of town where I sometimes had breakfast by myself, and I sat at the counter and ordered eggs and coffee and used the diner's phone book to find what I needed. There was a law firm on Commerce Street I had driven past 100 times. Phelps and Tarrant, Estate and Family Law. I wrote the number on a napkin. At 8:30, I was sitting across from a lawyer named Donna Tarrant. She was in her early 50s with a precise way of speaking and very calm eyes, the kind of eyes that have heard difficult things so many times that almost nothing surprises them anymore. I told her everything. I told her about the utilities, the missing money, the ATM withdrawals, what I overheard on the porch. I put the bank statements on her desk and she looked at them without expression. She asked a few clarifying questions. She did not seem shocked. She told me that what I was describing was unfortunately not unusual, and then she said something I wrote down in my head because I wanted to keep it. The law does not care how much you love someone. It only cares what can be documented. We can document this, she told me. She said my immediate priorities were these: change my bank accounts, both of them, that day. Add a PIN to my accounts that only I knew. Call the utility companies and change the billing contact to my personal phone number. And then come back to her office with the deed to the house, because we needed to understand exactly what was in my name and what, if anything, had been moved. That last part was a precaution, she said, but she said it in a way that told me it was a real concern. I thanked her and went directly to the bank. Priscilla was there again, and I explained what I needed. New accounts, new card, nobody else on anything. She helped me without a word of judgment, and by 11 o'clock my finances were locked down. Then I went home and retrieved my house deed from the fireproof box under my bed, and I drove back to Donna Tarrant's office. She studied the deed for a long time. Then she looked up at me with those calm eyes and said, "Mr. Grimes, there is a second mortgage on this property. It was recorded 11 months ago. The borrower listed is you." I told her I had never taken out a second mortgage. She nodded slowly, as if that was exactly what she expected me to say. The signature on the application, she said, would need to be examined. In the meantime, she wanted to send a letter to the lender. She said I should not confront my daughter yet, not until we had a clearer picture. I agreed, though sitting still with what I knew felt like trying to hold fire in my hands. I drove home. I cooked dinner. I sat at the table with Diane and Craig and Derek, and I ate and listened to Craig talk about a training webinar he'd attended, and I watched my daughter laugh at something he said, and I thought, you have no idea. And the strange thing is that didn't feel like power. It just felt like grief. The next week I let Donna work. She confirmed it. The signature on the second mortgage application had been forged. Mine, almost convincingly, but not quite. There were notary discrepancies. The loan was for $52,000. The monthly payments had not been made in 4 months, which meant the lender was already beginning default proceedings. On my house, on my name, without my knowledge. I asked Donna, "What does this mean for me legally?" She told me that because the signature was forged, we had strong grounds to have the mortgage declared fraudulent and voided. It would take time, but it was winnable. More importantly, she said, it changed the nature of what my daughter had done. This was not just a family disagreement. This was fraud. I sat with that word for a moment. Fraud, applied to my daughter. Then I asked Donna to prepare the eviction notices. She prepared 3. One for Diane and Craig Mobley. One for Derek Grimes. She reminded me again that they had 30 days by law. I told her I understood. I also asked her to update my will. My original will left the house equally to Diane and Derek, with a small sum to a local church Roberta had attended. I changed it. The house would go, upon my death, to a veterans organization in Clarksville that provided transitional housing for returning soldiers. I am not a veteran myself, but my father was, and my closest friend from my working years, a man named Roy, had come back from Vietnam changed in ways that took him decades to work through. I had thought about leaving something to that organization for a long time. Now seemed like the right moment. I went home on a Thursday evening with 3 envelopes in my jacket pocket. They were all in the living room, which was unusual. Diane was on the couch. Craig was in the armchair he had claimed as his. Derek was on the floor leaning against the wall with his phone. They looked up when I came in. I remained standing. I have found, in 67 years, that there is a particular advantage to standing when everyone else is sitting. I told them I had paid the utility bills. All of them, 3 months in arrears. I told them that I had also reviewed my bank statements and that I was aware of the 5 ATM withdrawals that were not made by me. Diane started to speak. I held up my hand. I told her I was not finished. I told them I was aware that a second mortgage had been taken out on my house using a forged signature, and that I had retained a lawyer and that the mortgage was in the process of being challenged as fraudulent. The room went very quiet. Craig recovered first. He said that was a serious accusation and that I had better be careful about what I was saying. I told Craig that I had been careful for weeks, and that being careful had given me the documentation I needed. Derek looked at the floor. Diane said, "Dad," and her voice did something complicated on that single word, went soft and young and hurt all at once. She said, "Dad, you don't understand the full picture." She said they had been trying to protect me. She said the second mortgage was supposed to be temporary, just to bridge a gap in Craig's business, and they were going to pay it back, and they never thought it would go this far. She said they were going to tell me. She said they just needed more time. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I heard your conversation on the back porch 3 weeks ago. I know about the doctor. I know about the diagnosis you were trying to arrange. I know what you plan to do with this house." The silence after that was different from the first silence. It was the silence of people who have been caught so completely that there is nothing left to say. I took the 3 envelopes from my jacket pocket and set them on the coffee table. "Those are eviction notices," I said. "You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live." Craig picked one up. He looked at it. He said something contemptuous about whether I thought a piece of paper was going to make him leave, and I told him that the piece of paper was legally binding and that my lawyer's number was at the bottom if he had questions. Diane started to cry. Not performance crying, not the tears I'd seen her use in arguments her whole life, but something real, something broken open. She said she didn't know how it had gotten to this. She said Craig had pushed her into it. She said she was so afraid of losing the house after she and her first husband lost everything. She just panicked. She let Craig take over. She told herself it was going to be okay. I believed most of that. I believed she was afraid. I believed Craig had pushed. I believed the panic. What I did not believe was that it excused any of it. I told her that. Then Craig stood up, and he looked at me with a flatness that I had never seen in a man's face directed at me. And he said, "You're going to die in this house alone, old man, and nobody's going to be sorry." And I said, "I'd rather die alone in my own house than live surrounded by people counting the days." He had nothing to say to that. He walked out of the room and I heard him go upstairs. Derek finally spoke. He was still on the floor, looking up at me. He said, "Pop, I'm sorry." Not a long speech, not excuses, just those 3 words. And I believed him, and it made everything worse. I said, "I know you are, Derek." Then I went to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed in the quiet, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not victory, not satisfaction, just a deep, aching exhaustion, and underneath it, barely detectable, something like solid ground. The days that followed were strained and strange. Diane barely spoke to me. Craig spoke to me less, which was a relief. Derek made coffee in the mornings and sometimes left a cup outside my bedroom door without knocking. and I thought that was the saddest and most decent thing I had seen in a long time. Donna Tarrant called on the 9th day to tell me the fraud claim on the mortgage was moving forward well, and that the lender had agreed to pause the default proceedings while the matter was investigated. She also told me something I hadn't expected. The money from the ATM withdrawals, $1,500 total across 5 months, could potentially be recovered through civil action. I told her to proceed. On the 19th day, Craig and Diane left. I didn't see them go. I heard the truck he'd rented backing out of the driveway, heard the doors, heard the engine pull away. They didn't knock on my door. Diane did not say goodbye. I stood at the window and watched the truck disappear around the corner, and I held my coffee with both hands and I tried to remember who she had been. At 7 years old, at 12, at the afternoon she graduated high school and Roberta cried, and I pretended not to. I could remember all of it. But the woman who had just left was not those memories. She was someone else who had grown up in the space where my daughter used to be, and I was only now accepting that those could be two different people. Derek stayed until the 27th day. On the morning he left, he came and found me in the garage where I'd been sorting through old tools. He stood in the doorway with his duffel bag and he looked like he hadn't slept. He said he'd gotten a room near the body shop. He said he was thinking about trying to get his hours back, maybe working toward a certification. He said he was sorry again, and this time he said it more slowly, like he'd been practicing. I handed him a socket wrench set that had been sitting in a box. I told him it was his grandfather's and he might as well have it. He took it like I'd handed him something breakable. I said, "You call me if you need anything legitimate. Not money, just anything legitimate." He nodded. He got in his car. He drove away. The house was mine again. That first night alone, I made a real dinner for the first time in months. Pork chops, which Roberta had made every other Sunday. I ate at the kitchen table with the overhead light on and the radio playing softly, and it was quiet in a way that was different from the quiet of being ignored. It was just quiet. Mine. 2 weeks later, my neighbor from 2 doors down knocked on my front door on a Saturday afternoon. I had seen him before, a heavy-set man in his late 60s named Gerald, who drove a truck with a veteran's plate and waved whenever he passed. He introduced himself properly and said he had noticed things had seemed difficult lately, not prying, just observed, and he wanted to know if I needed anything. I told him I was managing. He said that was good, and then he said he had too much chili on the stove if I wanted to come over. I said yes, mostly to surprise myself. Gerald's house was organized the way a man's house gets organized when he's spent a long time alone and made peace with it. Tools hung on the garage wall in neat rows, a workbench along the back, books in most rooms, paperbacks mostly, history and westerns. He had served 2 tours in the Army in the 80s and had come back and built a plumbing business from scratch and sold it when he retired at 62, and he talked about it all without either pride or complaint, just as things that had happened. We ate chili and talked for 3 hours, and when I walked home, the neighborhood looked different. Softer somehow. I started going to the Veterans Organization on Tuesdays. I didn't go as a donor, though they knew about the will and were grateful. I went as a volunteer, helping with the facility maintenance work since they were always short on people who knew electrical work. The men and women I met there, some of them young enough to be my grandchildren, some of them not much younger than me, had a particular quality I recognized without being able to name it exactly. They had been through something real and they were still standing. I respected that. One Tuesday, the director, a woman named Barbara who ran the place with the organized efficiency of someone who had learned that chaos costs lives, pulled me aside to show me a room they were finishing. She pointed to a wiring panel and described a problem they'd been trying to solve for weeks. I looked at it for about 90 seconds and told her what needed to happen, and she looked at me like I had said something miraculous. I told her it was just 40 years of work. She told me that 40 years of work was exactly the kind of miracle they needed. I drove home that afternoon with the windows down, which I almost never do because the wind bothers my ears. But it felt right. There is a Sunday morning ritual now. Coffee before 6, A walk around the block with the old transistor radio tucked in my jacket pocket, a habit that puzzles Gerald when he sees me and makes him smile. Back home to the kitchen, where I have started, slowly, to clear out the garden, not to restore it to what Roberta kept. I couldn't do that, but to make something new that is still connected to what she planted. The rose bushes along the fence are still alive underneath all the wild growth. 3 weeks ago I found them, still green at the root, still trying. Donna Tarrant called on a Friday in May to tell me the fraud case had been settled. The second mortgage had been formally voided. The $1,500 from the ATM withdrawals had been recovered through a small civil judgment. Diane had not contested it. I thanked Donna and asked what I owed her. She told me the bill was already in the mail and that it was a pleasure to work on a case where the right person won. I sat with that for a moment. I told Donna that I wasn't sure I felt like I'd won anything. She was quiet for a second and then she said, "You kept your house. You kept your money. You kept your name. That's not nothing, Mr. Grimes." "No," I said. "It's not nothing." Gerald came by that evening and we sat on my back porch with iced tea watching the sun go down behind the fence. The rose bushes were cut back now, ragged but clean, and in one corner of the yard there was something starting to come up green that I had planted from seed 3 weeks ago. Roberta's sweet peas, from a packet I found in the back of the kitchen drawer. Gerald asked how I was doing. Not the casual version of the question, the real one. I thought about it. I said, "I spent 30 years building something and then I spent the last 3 years watching it get hollowed out from the inside and I didn't stop it soon enough. And I don't know yet if I handled the end of it right or if I was too hard on people who were also just afraid." Gerald nodded. He said, "Probably both." He said, "Most big decisions are both." I said, "That's not especially comforting." He said, "No, but it's honest. And honest outlasts comfortable every time." We sat there until it was dark. The sweet peas were too small to see in the low light, but I knew they were there. Roberta had grown them every summer along the back fence, the kind that climb and spread and come back the next year if you leave them room. She always said they were worth the trouble. I didn't know yet if they were going to make it, those particular seeds. 3 weeks is not long enough to know. But I had planted them in good soil and I was giving them water and I was going to wait and see, which is all you can do with anything you've decided to grow. I have a full life now, or something approaching one. Tuesday mornings at the Veterans Center. Saturday afternoons at the flea market with Gerald, where I look for old tools and he looks for things he can't explain and we argue pleasantly about what any of it is worth. The garden. Slowly. The house is the same house it always was. Every creak in every floorboard. The window that sticks in August. The door that needs a push. But it's quieter than it used to be, and the quiet is different from how it was 6 months ago. 6 months ago, the quiet was the silence of being invisible. Now it is just the ordinary quiet of a man who has paid his bills and cleared his name and planted something in good soil. I am still here. That's not nothing.